Well, our next module to look at in this incredible kind of swing of modules is Module 30, and we're going to talk a little bit about intelligence and how we actually go about measuring it and understanding it. Now, before I go on here, let me just fix something for a minute. My pen is a little narrow, let's put it that way. So, Module 30, and we're going to look at intelligence. Essentially, the origins of intelligence testing began with a guy by the name of Alfred Binet and also Louis Terman. And Binet's ideas began to develop into a more advanced way of looking at and assessing, basically, intelligence testing. And really, one of the distinctions that we need to make is the difference between aptitude and achievement. And in a lot of ways, when we talk about aptitude, we're actually talking about someone's innate abilities. So this is innate. And in essence, I don't have to learn my abilities when it comes to aptitude. On the other hand, achievement really has to do with learned capacity or learned abilities or learned content, if you will. So usually what this turns into is academics or school learning, which comes into play when we're talking about achievement. So if you take an aptitude test, it's looking at more of your innate abilities, and when you're looking at an achievement test, it's looking specifically at what you have learned as a result of academic training and other training. So when we look at and talk about intelligence, usually we're talking more about aptitude than what most people might think about in terms of achievement. Achievement tests that you might take very much typically give us or render us a score relative to other students your same age, and look at mathematics or social studies or other things like that. So essentially, when we talk about an intelligence test itself, and what we're actually trying to assess is people's mental abilities. And so mental abilities in kind of core areas is what we're trying to understand here. But we not only take those and we then compare them to other people in presumably your same age range, etc. And that's essentially how we begin to understand how intelligence is formed and what is part of that. So we compare that to others, and essentially we translate that into some kind of numerical score of some sort. And so when you hear about an IQ score, essentially what we do is we have a series of tests that we would give someone, and we transfer their ability or their performance into a numerical score of some sort. And so one of the key people, and that's who this dashing gentleman is up here, is by the name of Alfred Binet. And Binet it was a Frenchman, and he began assessing intellectual abilities, and he teamed up with another person by the name of Theodore Simon, and began to systematize a test to help us understand a little bit more clearly the nature of intelligence itself. So they developed an intelligence test that contains questions that renders something that we used to refer to and still do, the Stanford-Binet test, is something that we refer to as the mental age of a person. And that may not necessarily translate into what we call your chronological age. So you may be 12 years of age, but your mental age is something entirely different. You could be functioning at a mental age of 15, 16, 17, depending on what actually happens in a test like we have in Stanford-Binet. So essentially, when we talk about these tests, Louis Terman is another person who was instrumental in the development of the Stanford-Binet, and he began his work at University of Stanford and began to develop what he referred to as the intelligence quotient, which is what oftentimes people commonly refer to as the IQ. And that has changed over the years considerably. The Stanford-Binet has one approach to measuring intelligence. Terman's test it renders basically what you have as an average of 100. So the average is 100, and plus or minus 15 points, essentially. And what that means then, which I'll explain in a minute, is that the vast majority of people fall within 85 and 115, essentially. And during the early part of the 20th century, intelligence tests were sometimes used in ways that even the people like Binet and Terman really regretted. They ended up categorizing and labeling people in very inappropriate ways. And that's a little bit of the history behind intelligence testing. The key to understand here is the difference between aptitude and achievement, and then how we go about trying to understand intelligence tests themselves.